It's working with.
No, just click out of that.
I saw they did that. So I'm doing laundry farm today and.
I don't have it.
Sure, it was a shot.
Right, yes.
Yeah.
You're supposed to get it.
It seems like a lot of these things are.
Yeah, you're Jay Richards at.
Fine. Yeah.
Oh, okay, I like it. Does this have one of these?
No,
We have.
Okay.
I signed some things the other day.
So what's, so what email should I use for you?
I have like 4 of them.
I've got mine. Mine's all set up, so.
Yeah. Did you get my email, Jim?
No. When did you send yours?
Today.
I got it.
Dana, you got it? That's good. 1 out of 5, 2 out of 5, 3 out of.
Responded.
I think I was wondering if my emails already changed. Because me and I forget the guy's name. We had an appointment. He couldn't make it, and I couldn't make it when we rescheduled. And said, okay, let's do this, and then
So you're not set up yet.
All right, we'll go ahead and get started. A quick roll call.
Jim Phillips.
Jim Richards.
Ryla Nyquist.
Or you know that, Dana Berger.
All right. The agenda, we have a couple items to add at the very end. So instead of number 7 is going to be a Tyler Tech software for Michelle. Number 8 is a building permit for the wastewater treatment plant. And number 9 will be the adjournment. So I make a motion that we add those number 7 and number 8, Tyler Tech and the building permit.
Second.
Comments? I think the number 7 and 8 were sent to you today by Renee, so you should have those on your table, I guess. So, all right, all those in favor, signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. All right. Thanks everybody for coming. See you and the representatives. So I appreciate you coming. So we have one item we want to take care of real quick, and then we'll have you present our first EDA meeting. So since the letter that was in our packet was dated March 7th. So since then, there's been a change in the personnel committee. So how would you like to proceed?
So the personnel committee had the opportunity to do an interview over the phone with candidate A, and it is in our kind of agreement with the personnel committee and with Kane that we'd like to make a motion to the council that we approve candidate A. Okay. And once we've approved, then I guess we can go forward from there.
Okay. So is that a motion then?
So I would move to approve candidate A. With a little background.
Is there a second first?
I'll second.
Okay.
He is a graduate from the Red Wing Vo-Tech. He has an associate's degree in HVAC. He's owned a small engine repair business for 2 years. He's got a lot of the qualifications that I think Kane was looking for to begin with. He has a great personality, interviewed beautifully with me. I think he'll fit in very well if he is, the person that is accepted into the position and he accepts. So I'm excited for him. I think that the city would benefit in adding this person to staff.
So in your motion, would you want to set the hourly rate then? So we offer that?
I think I just want to first, I think we just have to move that we accept him. And then once we have that, that voted on, then I think we can move to make an offer.
All right. Kane, would you come to podium?
Yeah.
Do you have any other comments regarding the motion and candidate
Just real quick, I wrote this email today. I don't know if everyone got it with the new emails, so real quick. I recommend moving forward with applicant A for the Public Works Assistant. Rylan, Jim Ackman, and myself interviewed this individual March 3rd. Lori and Jim did as well. Positive attitude, years of experience, education. Yeah, kind of everything Lori just touched on.
Okay. So
please move forward with my recommendation, candidate A. Lori's.
Good. Any other comments? Seeing none, all those in favor of approving candidate A, or applicant A or candidate A for this position, signify by saying aye.
Hi.
Aye.
Aye.
Oppose? All right, the motion passes.
And then from there, I guess we need you again. I would like to move that we offer, extend an offer to candidate A with a hourly rate of $24 an hour in a full-time position.
I'll second. Jim? Okay. Very good. Any other comments?
I was just wondering about the increase,
The what? I'm sorry.
that we had a different number in our packet.
So in the application, and then in what was presented in March, that was for the 2150. And we also had the other committee, the personnel committee, in their interviews, and the Kane's input as well, was the $24 rate. So that's what we're pursuing here. So
A bit more attractive. And I would hate to lose this applicant because of a lower wage.
the only comment I would have, I have probably a $24 raise. That is within our range that we were asking for in our applicants. If we look at a mid-April start of, or let's say just for discussion purposes, 2 weeks, April 15th or around the payroll date, whatever. The 6-month interview would happen in October. So from in the pay range that we have identified, some of that information or some of that probation review and subsequent increase may or may not be effective till 1 January, 2.5 months later, because of our pay equity range. We have to stay in without violating our pay equity among the other employees as well. So that would be the one stipulation. Just FYI. So,
I think that's fair.
any other comments? Seeing none, all those in favor of the motion to offer candidate A rate of $24 an hour, signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? All right, that's approved.
Is it appropriate for Kane to give this person a call to see if he would?
Yeah, Kane, if you want to.
Do you want me to do that and report back to you, or do you
Yes,
want
let's
me?
come back and ask us.
Gotcha.
Well,
Real quick.
Super. Okay, next item, we can just, let's just wait a minute. Come back up. And we're all anxious to look at that resolution. So.
He accepts.
Yay!
Thank you.
Thanks, Kane.
Thank you.
All right. Next item is a resolution 2022-08. This is all part of reestablishing precincts and polling places. And on your desk is an update on that resolution reflecting the March 29th date versus this 15th that was in your packet. So, so this is a voice vote. And, I make a motion that we approve resolution 2022-8, a resolution reestablishing precincts and polling places. This is something we do, especially in a the boundaries for voting district is identifying us as precinct 1, which is all the city of Orinoco. So I take it there will be a map attached with this resolution.
All these.
Says attached is a resolution for illustrative purposes, a map showing said precincts and location of each polling place.
Probably because we only have one.
Yeah.
Okay.
We don't need a map.
Yeah.
No,
City Hall and City Hall, right?
Yeah.
So just a little story on that one. We did already do the polling place, but because we didn't have the precinct on there, she had us redo it. So
Yeah,
that's why you're seeing a second one.
okay, because we did
Yeah.
approve it in December. And that's what the change was.
Yes.
Okay. All right.
Is this going to be for, there's a primary coming up and there's also a special election coming up this year? So that would be for
It'd
those,
be for any of those.
all of those as
Yep.
well. Okay.
Elections. Yeah.
Yep.
Any other comments? Who did the seconds?
I'll second it.
Okay. Any other comments? If not, by voice vote, all those in favor say aye individually or
Aye.
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 Aye. Aye.
Oppose. Okay. Chris.
But everybody has the latest and greatest. I did make copies, so I'll just make sure that you guys have that. How's everybody doing tonight?
Great.
Good. Thanks again for having us help you out with this. I'm kind of just envisioning this as kind of a workshop style conversation. So take some time to help you guys establish an economic development authority. We had some conversations last fall, I think earlier this year as well, just kind of what that might look like. And so we couldn't do it last month because of the weather, and now we're here. So kind of a couple items on the agenda tonight. Introductions. I just wanted to take a second just to kind of introduce myself and then my colleague Cora, and she's gonna be helping me through the process. And so you'll see her along with me as we're doing this, but we're gonna take 4, 5, or 6 meetings, depending on how long it takes just to get through everything. Some of these things can be fairly simple. Some of them can be a little more complex, but it'll be all up to how you guys want to do it as a council and help you through that process. Again, my name is Chris Geeson. I'm a vice president with Community and Economic Development Associates, economic development consulting firm out of Chatfield. Have worked with the council and the mayor on a number of projects here, including I think the last one was a survey for the wastewater plant. So yeah, you guys have a lot going on, and I think that especially is going to be a turning point for the community. I mean, you guys already have a location that everybody wants to have, but having that infrastructure is going to be another thing that will really drive a lot of activity and inquiries. And I think you guys are on the right track with trying to take advantage of that. So, Cora, I don't know if you want to say a couple words there.
Yeah, so I recently started with CETA, and I am part of their grants department. So currently doing some SCDP grants or small cities grants, working primarily in residential, doing a little bit of commercial in Wabasha at the moment, but so kind of working from the ground up on those pieces. So
yeah, excellent. Yeah, so she'll jump in if I get off base or throw something at me if I'm taking too long. So, but at any point, if you guys have questions about what I'm talking about, or if I throw an acronym or something that you get like, I don't know what that means, just let me know, because sometimes I'll just keep going, and I just need to get kind of reeled back in. But again, the kind of the overarching goal of this session, of these 4 or 5 sessions, are going to be to help you guys feel out what you want to see for economic development in the community without having to rely on using economic development staff time, or guys, if we had talked about doing a contract where we would provide some staffing services so that if that does happen, you guys can hit the ground running. You've got a work plan in place. There's an EDA that's ready to go, and you guys can just hit the ground running. Expectations for everybody, whether that's at the council, any volunteers that you guys get from the community, staff, that's always an important part, especially with economic development, because it is a long-term view, it's a long-term investment, but then the returns really do come back when you lay the right groundwork. So it's a pretty boilerplate process when it boils down to actually establishing an economic development authority, but I wanted to give you guys kind of our high-level training, so to speak, just to give you kind of a flavor of what EDAs do, what they aren't able to do, what applies to them, just so that you guys as a council can understand what we're gonna, what you're gonna be asking your EDA members moving forward. And I think that'll provide a great baseline for then talking about what are the priorities, what are the projects, how do the, how does the EDA work with the council, how does the council interact back with the EDA, who's on the EDA, and what those priorities should be for goals. So I don't know if you have it queued up on the presentation for the slides, but I have them in your packet if you just want to follow along too. So if anybody has in the crowd wants to see them, I can hand that out too, but just let me know. So it really just kind of going through these slides in your handouts kind of briefly here, but please feel free to jump in if you have any questions. When it boils it down, an EDA is an actual unit of government. It's something that is recognized by the state of Minnesota. Technically, it's controlled by the city council. It dates back to the mid-'80s when the city started wanting to use some powers that were more focused on development. They've been kind of doing those things already, but just to formalize that, take some of that off the council's plate and provide that expertise from the community to help take a look at some of these specialized projects. There's a whole framework in statute as to how an EDA can operate, what they can do, what they can't do. The enabling resolution is really the main key. In order to establish an EDA and act as an EDA, to have an EDA, you have to pass an enabling resolution. That's kind of a multi-step part. There's a formal resolution. You have to have it in the newspaper for a couple of weeks. I think you have to actually do it twice in the newspaper. You adopt the resolution. There's some boilerplate language in there as to just make sure that the state has its legal terms covered. But it also provides the makeup of the EDA, and you guys have some choice on that. It also has the restriction of power. So like I mentioned, it's an EDA can technically function as its own body, its own entity, sign its own checks, sign its own contracts, own its own stuff, get sued in its own name, basically function on its own. It can even levy taxes if you guys gave them that authority. But ultimately, in a lot of these smaller communities, what happens is the city council structures it just as an advisory committee. So, if you're the St. Paul Port Authority, for example, you might have a little different operating level, but most of the cities that are the size of Roanoke are the ones that we work with. EDAs really are just an advisory committee, no different than planning and zoning, park and rec, public works. Everything that they do comes to council, gets approved, not approved. There's some variations on that as to, if it's in their budget, perhaps the council will allow them to do certain things. So, yeah.
So is it typically made up of the city council, or is it just a few members and then members of the community, or what do you typically see?
In communities this size, it's usually the hybrid approach. So by statute, you can either have, by statute, you have to have 2 members of the city council at least on the EDA. And from there, you get to choose whether it's a 3, 5, or 7 member board. Now, whether or not you want to round that out with the rest of the city council, you can do that. But there has to be at least 2. In most smaller cities, they do operate as an advisory committee. And so they really want to get that advisory input from local stakeholders, whether that's a business owner, whether that's a retired person, somebody that just was really into it. There's a lot of good ways to do it. We always kind of start out with people that are interested, people that, show a passion for the community. It really is kind of your sales team. So that's always something that you want to kind of think of. Who has that passion to kind of be that sales front and be able to look at it analytically too, because they are making some pretty complex decisions in some cases. But now if you go over, a quorum of the council, if you have 5 members on your council, so if you have 3 council members, then technically it's also a city council meeting. So you have that to kind of navigate too, but that's all done. It's something that can be done if you wanted to do that. The only one that I can think of off the top of my head that has all city council members as the EDA is the city of Rochester. And they kind of have a different arrangement where they don't necessarily meet all the time. It's more of just a functionary thing for some financing purposes. So that's kind of an exception. Most also do not levy taxes. I can only think of 2 off the top of my head. And usually that is more for operations of the EDA to pay for, staff or projects without having to put it onto your tax capacity levy that the city as a whole passes. It all comes from the same pockets. So it's more of a, how do you split the hair essentially of what's sellable to the community? So that's has happened, but that's also rare. So you got to pick the board size. Who's going to be on that? That's actually a mayoral appointment. I'm not sure how your other boards would be appointed normally, but typically it's under statute, it's a mayoral appointment with council approval. So that would be something that ultimately those mayors in the future will be reappointing. Whether or not you have term limits or things like that, that's up to your local practices. That's something that you guys can do. And they have a 6-year term. So that's something to kind of keep in mind that it's not just a 1-year deal like maybe some of your other committees would be, but there's also reality as to people quit. So
the 6-year term, from what I understand, there can be 2-year, 3-year, 4, 5, 6 terms given to each member or whatever. So we're not all together for 6 years, but there's a staggered in and out.
If you can keep that schedule, you guys are awesome. Most of them just kind of go by the wayside after time, but yes, in statute, it does lay that out. So technically you're supposed to do it that way, but in practice, it's kind of all over the board. And then you throw in the passage of time and people leaving and coming on midterm and all that stuff.
Develop its own rotation.
Yeah. So essentially I think the first one, like you said, it's all staggered in that first one, and then you just have a schedule and you add that to whatever appointments you'd be making on an annual basis. So I mentioned already that, you guys get some authority there if the council were to allow you to have a levy. It's defined what the maximum would be in law, so you can't get too crazy, but that's also an unusual thing. Then the statute also allows for certain powers. So you can practice buying property, holding property for an industrial park or a commercial park, or establishing a redevelopment district, or doing a housing project, or setting up a foreign trade zone. There's I don't know, a whole list of things that you guys are able to do in statute that EDAs are able to engage with. Tax increment financing, tax abatement, lots of different projects that you guys really can dive into. So kind of moving into what the EDA do, they can also kind of function as a housing and redevelopment authority. So that's something I do like to recommend that EDA take on that role. It's just a matter of putting in a line into your enabling resolution that you can act that as a housing redevelopment authority in HRA. Homestead County does have an HRA as a county, but it's very usual to have that just in your incorporation documents, just in case you ever wanted to do that. Some cities get very active on that, and there's some housing things that it may come in handy for, and it can lay dormant if you don't need it. And again, the development powers, you can create economic development districts, acquiring and selling property, exercise option contracts. You can do eminent domain if you wanted to. Contracts, be a limited partner in a business. They take on property easements, purchase supplies, accept public land. I mentioned the foreign trade zone, redevelopment. You can operate public facilities like a parking ramp or a parking lot or a sports arena. You can act as a government agent, conduct studies and research, and then engage in public relations, so marketing and things like that. I guess before I move on, is there anything that kind of you're wondering about what an EDA could do or can't do, or some of those powers that I mentioned?
Go ahead.
Help me understand the property easements. What do they do? Because it almost sounds like they're taking some of the tasks of the planning and zoning in some respects. It sounds like, or am I wrong?
It's kind of a separate idea, with planning and zoning, you're going to be looking at what's appropriate, from a city level, to protect, future things, or to protect, a neighbor, to protect a piece of pipe that's in the ground. With the EDA, you can actually own those easements. So that easement might be a piece of physical ground to protect some sort of access point. It also might be a facade of a building that's really important for the community. So they'll do like a historic facade and try to keep a look of a downtown or something like that. That's more uncommon, especially around here. But you get into some of the real kind of progressive cities, they might be looking at things like that, where you actually take an easement on a facade or a kind of a neighborhood for aesthetic purposes. So there's really kind of a range there. On the EDA side, it would be more of the holding those easements as a protector, or as the guarantor of those easements, as opposed to on the planning and zoning side, you'd be looking at, okay, we need an easement here for access and we need an easement there for utility lines or something like that.
So they're not dealing with code.
Not necessarily. I mean, it still applies to them. So I mean, you're gonna have to pass muster with planning and zoning on whatever, if you wanted to put an easement in. But it's more of a situation where if you were going to try to preserve access, you guys could be the holder of that title, as opposed to the city. And sometimes there's some advantages to that. Sometimes it doesn't really make a big difference. But the big thing is with an EDA, you're able to kind of deflect some of the either deflect or give more ability to that project. So if you guys wanted to have an industrial park, for example, similar to what People's Energy has across the road, the EDA could perhaps be the owner of that. And there's special rules that are allowed to do that with, that the city council or the city as a whole, if the city of Warren-Oak was on the title, you're not able to, you wouldn't enjoy that kind of protection. So with an economic development authority, you'd be able to hold that property without even having to pay property taxes on it for economic development. So, if it was a valuable piece of improved land, as opposed to just a park, you don't have to pay taxes on a park or, just regular city property. But a good example is in Stewartville, for example, their business park out on the north end of town. They originally were told they had to pay property taxes on that, even though the city owned some of that. And they were paying like $40,000 a year property taxes. Well, because they were able to switch it over to EDA's name. And then we informed the county that they were, that there was actually the state statute that existed, then they didn't have to pay that property tax again for a period of time. So there's some different protections there. There's also differences when it comes to selling the property or getting rid of it. EDA, because you're doing things for economic development purposes, that differ a little bit from what the city has. So it's more of a way to kind of divide the responsibility, put the focus on that development purpose for what you're looking at doing, and kind of highlighting that importance of the development or the purpose that the city is actually engaging in that activity.
So the third point, or the second point, you kind of mentioned acquired sell property. That's the property that the EDA owns.
Yeah, if you wanted to. You don't have to, but there's cities that some development land will be owned by the city. And some of that's just because it was inherited that way. But politically, sometimes it's easier to sell that to the public that, hey, we're engaging in this purchase. we're engaging in this purchase for development purposes. We're gonna kind of put our stamp on that. We have our EDA, our advisory board overseeing that. They're gonna be the ones vetting the sale. They're gonna be the ones vetting the projects. They're gonna engage in, you know, getting a grant to fund the infrastructure, whatever it is. So it's kind of a way to separate that off and have that kind of under its own magnifying glass, if you will.
So one of the questions for is, I think in meeting number 3 or number 4, you make reference to inviting community members, stakeholders. Maybe we can talk about them. So like landowners that are within our future land use but are not part of the city limits. Does the EDA get involved with talking to those landowners, or is that just separate?
It could, you know, some of that is going to fall back on planning and zoning and, you know, what's going to be actively in the city. I've always taken the position that, you know, the development doesn't stop at the corporate limit. You want to make sure that you're looking at what the future is going to bring too. So it really is a joint effort, you know. It's another tool in your belt to look at getting those owners on board with maybe some future ideas, maybe finding some developers that might be buying that land. You know, the planning and zoning, in my mind, is more of a code regulation / enforcement effort, you know, making sure that you have that end of it. On the zoning side, and the planning is really looking at the future and figuring out how that process fits for that future area. The EDA then is more of the sales and development team. Okay, we know we want to have industrial over here and commercial over there. Let's go make it happen. Let's go shake the bushes. Let's go talk to people. Let's see what we can do. In some cities, the role is going to be more switched around. You know, it might be a situation where the EDA kind of takes on that visionary function. There isn't a right or wrong reason or, you know, way to do it. It's more about what culturally you guys are okay with and what develops over time. You know, that proactiveness of the development phase with the EDA is really important. That's really where they shine versus the P&Z is more reactionary. And there is that planning element there, but a lot of times you aren't able to do anything until there's an application in, for example.
So is this a true statement then? If the EDA plans on doing something, let's say, you know, purchasing land or you know, whatever it is on this list, they bring it to council and the council has to vote on it to say, okay, you can move forward with it. They don't have the ability just to say, hey, we're going to do this and we approve it on our own.
If you set it up that way. And typically what I would recommend is that it just function, the EDA function as an advisory committee. So, you know, if they want to purchase land, okay, they have to come to you and have it be ratified. You know, there's a process that they're going to have to go through on their own. You know, if they sell that, they're going to have their own public hearing. They're going to have to do some different things there for notice and different, there's some requirements that they have for development within a certain time frame and different agreements that have to go into place. But the idea being that that's why you bought it in the first place, was to make something happen. But to your point, you know, it is something that they would have to bring back to the council for final approval. And so in those cases, we would do, you know, if I was doing that, I would say the sales can, you know, here are the terms of the sale, and it's also contingent upon city council approval. Now, if you were really feeling adventurous, you just said, hey, we're going to create an Orinoco EDA and they can do whatever they want under state law, they wouldn't have to. I mean, you could take that route. So that's kind of opening up another can of worms.
Is that not the norm?
No. You know, there is some, you know, flexibility. So kind of on that same point, let's say you guys are set them up so that everything has to be ratified. There may be some things like some small marketing expenses. You know, let's say, you know, you treat them like a department of the city. They have a marketing budget for the year. There's $5,000 in there. They give you your annual report as to what they're looking at doing for the year, and they want to do, you know, put up some billboards. Well, that might be something that they can do on their own then within that budget already being pre-approved. So that's more of just a comfort level that the city council, depending on what your current practices are, some cities will take a very liberal approach to that and say, nope, everything that you guys spend has to come to council. Others might take more of a, well, it was in your budget, we knew you were going to do it. just like Public Works probably doesn't bring every, little tiny thing to the council for pre-approval. Ultimately, all the checks and everything would get run through council and approved that way. So it's just kind of one of those cultural practices thing that whatever works best here. So that's kind of one of the sticking points though too. I would highly figure out what that is as we go through what you want this operating as, because it's too easy just to point fingers at people and say, well, you just went and spent that money, or I just, I didn't think we could, or so it's one of those touchy things that it's easier to figure out and get on the same page right away. So.
So if the council decides on something to give the EDA a specific power, can the council then at some point say, well, that doesn't fit anymore into, the makeup of the city or whatever it might be? Can they renege on that?
Absolutely.
Or just pull it back?
Yeah, so there's kind of two main documents that an EDA will have. One is the enabling resolution, and that's where you would line up all of those items as to what the powers are. Okay. I think I would just, my typical proposal would be or recommendation would be to say, we'll give you all the powers, but you can't exercise any of those powers unless the council approves it. So it's kind of this circular thing, but it basically allows EDA to do anything that statute allows, as long as you guys agree to it. That's the most typical. And the reason that I like that is because you don't have to go back and change the enabling resolution really ever. It's kind of a pain to have to change that resolution. You have to go through a process, and you have an annual report after the first year that the EDA has to get back. And so it's just one of those things that then you have to get the attorneys involved to make sure everything's okay. And it's just set it and forget it is kind of the best way to do that. And as long as everybody knows that we've turned on all the switches, but we only actually get to go forward if the council is on board. That's the simplest, easiest way. It keeps all the paperwork to a minimum and go from there. The secondary set of documents would be the EDA's bylaws. And those really only apply to how the business of the EDA operates. You appoint some officers, who signs the checks, who does this, how do you remove a person, all those different kind of functionary things. Most of those are actually set out in statute too. So it's kind of one of those common misconceptions that hey, we can just change our bylaws and do this or do that. They're easier to change than the enabling resolution because it just takes a meeting to the EDA to do that. But it's more of a boilerplate, boilerplate set of operating procedures for a typical EDA meeting. And so you would appoint a board chair, you have a secretary, you have a vice chair and a treasurer or the officers. The president or the chair of the EDA is usually the one that has the most set of responsibilities, and they're the one signing things if you do enter into a contract or buy some land or things like that. Those types of things. So that's usually what the bylaws will take on, but the bylaws wouldn't take on what the board is able to work on or not work on. That would already be predetermined by the council. And then if you ever did want to change the enabling resolution, you certainly could. But if you do it in that way that I was suggesting earlier, you really don't have to. It's just everything's okay if you want it to be okay. So yeah, and that covers several of the next slides. So thank you for the question. Yeah, the limitation of powers and all that's just kind of one of those things I want you guys to think about is how do you want the EDA to operate? If you set this up, do you want it to act as its own thing? Or do you want it to act as an advisory committee that still has to run through council and to what level? Because I think, over time, once everybody gets a handle on how that process works, you'll find your own groove and it might look different. But for now, just try to figure out what your vision as a council is for this group. In addition to who's on the EDA, what types of members should be on it? Should it be the council? You guys can really, change that as people come and go. But once they get put in, then they have that 6-year term. And then you have to kind of go through the process of removing them for cause or, those types of things. And so it gets kind of messy. So just where people have to resign. So just, putting that thought into who would best represent and bring ideas forward and be excited to look at these opportunities.
Chris, can I ask you a question on that? How does that, we have we have 4-year terms as council and 2-year as mayor. How does that work? Let's say that we did kind of the norm and had 2
Sure.
members from council, but like Jim and I are up this, like we're in that year.
Sure.
So let's say that we're not on council next year, but we were on EDA. How do we just put that in, like once like if council isn't
Yeah, so that's a great
going
question.
back in, then they're off, or how does that?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. Do you have term limits in any of your boards or anything like that? Okay. The short answer is once your council term is done, then your council term on EDA would be up as well. If you remember, you have to have 2 members of the council on EDA. So if you're no longer a council member, somebody's going to have to take your position as a council.
Yep.
Now, if there was also a vacancy on the EDA, you could definitely slide over and take that on. Typically what will happen if you did have term limits, you would still, keep track of, okay, 6 years is your appointed term, but you only have a 4-year council term, but you've been on council for, two terms. You'd have to get reappointed to the EDA by the mayor at that future 6-year mark. So if there are long-serving council members that are also on the EDA, their 6 years will eventually come up too, and they may be asked to not be on the EDA again if there's a new mayor.
Because there is on EDA a 6-year term limit.
Yeah, no, it's just a 6-year term. There's no statutory.
Okay, got it.
Only if the city has its own term limits.
Okay, got it.
Yeah, I work with one town where they say you can only serve on a board 2 consecutive terms, whatever that term is. But it's also a full term. So if somebody came on, filling out one person's 5 years of somebody's 6-year term, you theoretically be on there for almost 20 years. So it's almost a life sentence. So just keep that in mind. But that always scares people too when you tell a volunteer that, hey, it's a 6-year commitment. Like, oh gosh, I don't even know what I'm doing for dinner next week. That's something just to talk about and keep in mind. But usually it's not a problem, and people are just excited to re-up when that comes. So yeah, and that's actually a good mention too, picking board members that are willing to participate, show up, especially with some of these projects, there's maybe millions of dollars on the line for these developers, wanting to make sure that you guys are speaking with one voice and active and participating, doing the research, reading packets, doing the homework ahead of time. A developer comes in, they're maybe planning on having a groundbreaking on such and such a date. Well, in order to do that, they have to get approvals on a very tight timeline. And if we don't get a quorum because something came up, life happens. So that's understandable, but that communication that whoever's running the EDA meeting so that you can reschedule and keep things moving. There's nothing like a developer that misses a deadline and it's the city's fault. So I haven't had that happen yet. They always at the outset always say, oh, the city's going to slow me down. I've never had that happen. It's usually the other way around where they slow things down, but you guys will get into that and find your own flow too. But meeting attendance is important, just for that fact. And then EDAs are subject to the open meeting law. So that is something that, just like you as a council would have to worry about. That is something that the EDA is subject to, whether you're on council or not. So even the private members would have to do that. That applies to email communications, chance meetings, all those fun things that you guys get to think about. Rules of conduct, here's another thing that, if you guys have your own ethics policy or ethics committee, some cities do, just kind of figuring out how the EDA will fit in with that. I always recommend that maybe a conflict of interest policy. Counselors, you're an elected position, but if you put the bank president on the EDA and then they're approving loans for the city that or making recommendations on a loan for a city, that's also a customer of theirs. In a small setting like this, we all know who's who and what's what, and people say I have a conflict of interest. But just having that formal policy so that everybody's on notice. It's actually something that a lot of times now with like USDA and different types of financing or grants, they make you have a conflict of interest policy anyway. So if you do have one of those, extending that to the EDA would be a good idea to do. And, just kind of including that in your culture.
So is there something that, is there any rule that says Or is it maybe an understood rule that says you have to balance that board with certain types of people, maybe saying, well, you need 3 residents, you need 3 local business owners, we know what you said about council members. Is there a rule? And if there isn't, do you typically see them on purpose balance that board?
The best ones do. They find some way to balance that. The short answer is it's up to the mayor, and then you guys get a veto on that as council, whoever they put forward. The practical answer is, who's willing to show up. You might not find anybody that fits those roles. Now, on the other hand, you might have too many and you'll have to say no to some people. So it really just depends on how that flow is. But the best practice would be to have somebody that's, have board members that are balanced from the community, maybe a balance within the vision of what the council wants to see for the community. The EDA is going to be dealing with loans. They're going to be dealing with grants. They're going to be dealing with property development. They're going to be dealing with developers and real estate agents and business owners. So people from those backgrounds tend to be the best. In addition, people that have used your programs, I always love having those types of people on the board because they know how much it helped them and they know how it worked and they know that it works and they've been through the process. So they bring a lot to the board. You guys are new, so you won't have that right out of the gate, but as you move forward, somebody that maybe took a loan from the EDA, somebody that you gave TIF assistance to, or, something like that has been through that process and can bring that background. But bankers, real estate people, just community stakeholders that are community leaders that have in some boards, it might be a retired principal from the school. It might be somebody that was just a good coach that everybody looks up to and has good judgment.
Does it have to be a resident?
No, but I would recommend that they have some sort of business tie if they are not a resident. And so that's up to you guys as a council to make that judgment. That's not an uncommon thing, especially if you have a community that has a lot of businesses but not a lot of residents. You're going to probably have a business owner that lives out in the country, right? So that is something that will come up. Confidentiality is also another thing. I just talked about the open meeting law, but there are going to be things that will move forward that staff and key committees of the EDA can, operate in the public meetings. In a meeting like this, it has to be open in the public. But you also have the ability to set up a subcommittee or appoint staff or, have a staff worker that is having those conversations. And knowing and trusting those staff and key committee members that they are doing that homework. Nobody wants their financial positions written about in the newspaper. And so just like you were doing tonight with the hiring, there's some ways around that are legal and ethical. But at the same time, knowing that part of the process is going to have to happen confidentially with those businesses in order to get them to a point where they can come and ask. And that's what I always tell our businesses that are asking for assistance is that we'll get you to that point. But then at the point you want to ask something of the city or that you need that ask, that's when you're going to have to come to the council, you're going to have to come to the EDA, and then it's going to be public information at that point as to who you are, what you're asking for, and that kind of thing. But you can do all the background up to that point to try to get them in a position. Because a lot of times, it doesn't work out. And so it's kind of a numbers game. If you had 10 projects, you might have to have 20 people come through the door that actually, get you to that point where you have 10 real projects. So just realizing that there's that level of confidentiality that, even a business owner may make certain people sign an NDA. I know when FedEx Ground opened up in Stewartville, it actually got contentious because the council members at that time really wanted to know what was going on out there and who was knocking on the door. No land changed hands, no deals were done. Nothing was actually finalized without the whole council knowing what was going on in a public open meeting. But to get to the point where those developers felt comfortable that that particular lot was okay, that, you know, the competition wasn't gonna box them out, that X, Y, and Z wasn't gonna happen. The people that they were talking to all had to sign NDAs. So it was kind of a process of trust. And that's also what the EDA can bring to the table with development, is to provide that layer of protection for the council so that you don't have to do these things in an open meeting.
But with that said, does that make a developer a conflict of interest?
How, I think I know where you're going with that, but I just expand a little bit on that, or.
Yeah, so let's say I'm a developer.
Yeah.
And I'm on the EDA.
Oh.
And we're looking at a specific piece of property. Or we're looking, maybe not a specific piece, maybe a type of property. I'm on the EDA and I've got that type of property that we say, hey, that's kind of property we're looking for.
Yeah. That's where the conflict of interest policy
Yeah.
comes in. And actually one of the forms that I've used in yes, every community has a different policy that's slightly different, but one that's going around out there simply just, you know, states your policy and then you just declare your conflicts of interest. So I own a bunch of land that's, you know, meeting our development goals or whatever the wording would be on that. So at least it's on file that everybody knows you've got some land and have an interest. You know, and then on the other side of that is, okay, you guys want to start talking about developing that land. You probably shouldn't be in on those subdivisions. Yeah, that would be a conflict of interest in most cases. So it's realizing that, knowing where things are at, but that's the beauty of having 5 other people on the board is, you know, there's somebody else that can look at that. And then at that point you become the developer and you're working with the staff,
right? Just
kind of, you know, participating as if you were just requesting something as opposed to a board member. Of course, not voting and things like that. So
I know some of the questions I'm asking maybe you should be asked in a different forum.
No. That's a great question. That's a great question.
Always be cautious of that.
Yeah.
Conflict of interest. Yeah.
Honestly, you know, when you're on a board that's filled with bankers and realtors and things like that, especially in a small town, it's almost impossible to avoid conflicts in every situation. It's just everybody knowing where people are coming from and then stepping out when it's needed. Because 9 times out of 10, it's really not a conflict. It's more of just the perception of that. And keeping that integrity, that level of integrity will be important for the EDA again, just because you guys are dealing with public money, you're dealing with public policy, you're making recommendations to the council's going to rely on that. And then these projects will move forward based on all those small things that add up. So very important aspect of it. As well as the compliance and accountability. You know, again, there's certain things that you guys are going to have to comply with for grants and programs, federal requirements, state requirements. If you get a loan through USDA or you get a grant through deed, they're going to have certain elements that you guys will have to comply with, and that's just part of dealing with government. So, you know, having those EDA members that can agree to that and have, you know, that level of commitment.
The one question I have, I don't want to keep stopping
No.
the presentation. So I'm just wondering, I know we've got a lot to cover. I'm just wondering do we let you go through this, and is there some video or something kind of like we did with LMC that we can watch that explains all this in more detail?
I don't know if there is something through LMC. I'll have to look at that. I've never seen that. There's a handbook out there that's just in text form. Really the purpose of this is just to give you this high level understanding of it. So if you do have questions, I'm happy to talk about it, but I can go through it quick too. But before we start talking about, you know, what your priorities are and what the projects are, I wanted to give you kind of some framework as to what you can and can't do and what your responsibilities would be, because that might change your mind as to whether something might work or not. So
I'll hold
that's okay.
My deep questions.
I look at this as just a workshop, so throw them out there. I'm happy to bat. So, all right. Meeting rules. You know, you're gonna have your agendas and all that. That's pretty typical. You guys are well versed on how meetings run. Very typical. You'll have your own processes and procedures. So if you guys establish a loan fund or a program that you create on your own, you know, having those processes in place is going to be important.
What sheet are you on?
What's that?
What sheet are you on? Sheet?
3. Top right.
Staple there, I can't.
I'm kind of taking the highlights of it. Some of them are kind of redundant, so.
Establish process and procedures, that's where that.
What is it?
Establish process and procedures. I'm the only one who can follow along.
I'm trying to make it interesting and try to not bore you guys, so it's been a long day.
That's free, okay.
Yeah, so having those standard operating procedures are important too, especially when somebody comes in and requests assistance. There's not a lot of projects that look the same, you know, everything's a little different, but having that process of, okay, we need to understand the parameters of your request, we need to understand what you're really trying to do. You know, let's get a site plan, let's get some information. Those types of procedures are important that you'll develop as you go forward. And some of that will kind of be to be determined as projects do come forward too. But you're going to have a lot of documentation and reporting on some of the programs that they may engage with. So just so that's not a surprise, it's not the end of the world in this area, but just making sure that everybody knows that money doesn't fall out of trees. They usually like to see how you spend it. So, you know, again, the role of the EDA or project facilitator, you can make recommendations to the city council. Staff provide information to the EDA, just like, you know, if you have a city clerk or a public works director that's recommending what types of projects to engage in, then the council ultimately would make those approvals or denials. You know, I think as a staff person, usually what we try to do is put it in a position where it's you can say yes to it. You'll know what your priorities are and your outlook is as a council, as an EDA. So that if something comes in that's just off the wall, we'll make sure that it isn't off the wall when it gets to you, or, you know, help them kind of come up with a way to make it workable. You know, ultimately, sitting around the table are going to be the ones making the decisions, but it's always easier if we can help craft that and help facilitate it. Again, a lot of economic development is about building relationships. And so the easier that the developer has, the easier time the developer has in getting through the process, the more attractive you are as a community to be doing business in, the easier it is for people to get through and start whatever project they may want to do. So just trying to streamline that, create that professional outward look of Orinoco, have that professional sales team, you know, process to move them through efficiently. Basically hold their hand through the red tape of government, even though in our smaller towns, it doesn't really exist like it does in some other ones. So, and then also, you know, you have to maintain certain administrative documents. So making sure that you guys are up to snuff on whatever paperwork you create, having to maintain that. So whatever filing systems or processes that you guys have for the city, you just have to accommodate the EDA paperwork as well. But no, record retention, open meeting, or not open meeting, Freedom of Information Act requests, things of that nature all apply to EDA as well. So again, you know, the EDA building relationships, you know, you're trying to build yourself as the chief marketer, the chief sales team, the chief development team for the city, trying to work within the umbrella that the city council has set. And that's really one of the end goals of this process with you. You know, I think at the end of the 4 sessions or 5 sessions, whatever we end up doing, you know, having a work plan in hand that's prioritized and that's manageable. One of the biggest failures that can happen for especially a new EDA or an EDA that's taking a step and bringing some staff on can be mismanaged expectations. You know, if you come up with a priority list that's 20 pages long and you want to do all of this right now, and we're not going to put any money behind it for budget, you know, to actually do any of it, and we're only going to have a part-time person, you have to be realistic going into that to understand what's going to come out. And so that's one of the things that just managing what those priorities are. As we get to that point, think about what's most important, what's maybe the low-hanging fruit. You know, even just checking off some of those easy things quick and keep moving so that there's some traction that you get. Especially in the public realm, you know, it's easy from the public that aren't involved in the process to maybe say, well, you're not doing anything, there hasn't been any results. So if you can get some kind of easy wins just to say, hey, we're going to do a citywide cleanup, or we're going to do you know, new banners downtown, or we're going to do new street lights, or whatever it is, and it's something that you're gonna, you know, just check off the list anyway. Let's all talk about it, check it off, and make a big deal out of it because you got it done. So building those relationships. Creating marketing plans, maintaining your economic development resources. You guys can establish a loan fund. You guys can establish rehab grants that you guys fund yourself. You can go get funding from other sources to bring that in. And then you guys might have some discretion on how to spend those dollars or how to tailor those programs. So kind of creating all that, listening to the community, seeing what's needed. That's always the fun part, is handing out.
So I have a question. So in reviewing some of the local area EDAs, the seat representative sometimes has the role of an EDA director. Is that true?
Most of the time, yeah.
Most of the time, okay.
Yeah. It varies slightly as to what that means. Actually, one of the towns that I work with, technically, I'm just the EDA coordinator, and the city administrator's technically the executive director. But the way that it works from a practical sense, you're the guy. You're the one doing it. You're the one that's responsible for the project, moving it forward, typing the packets up, typing the minutes up. In our communities, we try to just do it all and take that off the administrator or clerk's desk. Usually what happens is the economic development gets kind of sidetracked because there's just not enough time. It's kind of the fun stuff, but it's also time consuming, and there's always other things that are burning, whether that's, getting bills paid, reading meters, getting utility bills out, whatever it is. There's always something else to do in the city office. And so this really provides that, not only the expertise for projects, but just that administrative capacity too, just to get it done. And so it'd be very common for us to do all that admin.
So in our case, where we plan to seat a contract for one day every other week. So with that seat representative also have the role of EDA director too. So that EDA director, the funding of that EDA director would still fall within the CETA contract?
Oh, yeah. Yep. Yeah. So I think that's like a $14,000 a year contract, something like that. That would cover whatever you guys want us to have done. If you guys want to free up more time for us and say, hey, we'll handle the agenda packets and typing minutes and taking all that stuff, because we want you just to get out there and talk to businesses and not worry about any of the admin. That's fine. If you're thinking like most of our cities do and just say, hey, we just want to do economic development, but we don't have any time to do it. We want to do it the right way. You're in charge of the packets. You're in charge of the meetings. You're in charge of the, everything they come up with. That's part of it. So yeah.
That'd be the balance between the secretary of the EDA and the CETA EDA.
Yeah, no, and most of the time what happens is you have to appoint the secretary, and then there's some cases where they have to sign things as secretary, but all the powers of taking minutes and keeping the records, that's just delegated to the staff. So it's more entitled only.
Same staff, that's CETA.
CETA, yeah, however you want.
City staff.
Yeah, however you guys want to do it. I mean, I'm sure they've got plenty to do already. So we'd be happy to do that. But then realizing that, then that takes some of that time up too. It might take a morning to do the agenda packets, type minutes and things like that, which then takes time away from projects. So it's a balancing act.
Sure, okay.
That's the importance of that work plan. What is it that we want you to do? And part of that would be to say, okay, we want you to run all the admin. We want you to do all the reporting. We want you to do all the ongoing, loan payments and, processing. If you guys get a portfolio with 10 loans in it and half of them aren't paying, who's collecting, so that can be part of what we do too. Okay. But it's just working that into your work plan so that, again, you don't have too much of a focus on the wrong things, or the expectations are too large for what you're able to put into as a commitment. And that can grow over time, and it can change over time. The work plan is more of a fluid document that here are just our goals. And given everything being equal, here's what we're going to attack first, second, and third. And here are the things that are just going to happen every month because we're going to meet every month. So I think that's just part of that process that we'll walk you through here over the next couple months.
Mm-hmm. Super. One question I have, and I'm just wondering, is there like an average time range that it takes from the time we start the planning to the time that we actually have a working, functioning EDA board?
I don't know. We kind of came up with this process specifically for Orinoco. You know, when you guys were talking with us last fall, my CEO and myself were talking after the meeting, and because you guys had mentioned, well, we don't even have an EDA established. You know, we don't know what we want to do or how to operate. So much of that goes into the success of that board, and even, you know, for us as a contractor, we want to be successful. We want to get you guys in the right position. We want to see Orinoco grow. And the best way we thought we could do that was to let's take some time on the front end so that we can get through all the kind of the nitty gritty stuff. Let's come up with a solid plan that's reasonable, that doesn't have to have, you know, the EDA taking up all their time to do it. I think that can be done in 3 or 4 months, you know, depending on how all these conversations go. Again, I'm just looking at these as workshops. We're trying to figure out what your goals are, what your priorities might be, give you guys enough information to be dangerous on that end. And then we'll put some thoughts and suggestions forward to you that you can either say, ah, you guys are way off base, or yeah, we like that, or just tweak this here or there, or rearrange it, whatever. So, yeah. The whole idea is just to give you guys and your EDA members a sense of direction and energy to really hit the ground running. But I think this is kind of the unique thing that I wish we did with more of our communities that we work with. We do this training free for any of our communities as much as they want, just because it's good stuff for them to dive into and ask questions about. But especially when you haven't had an EDA or you haven't had an active EDA, this is probably one of the first times that I know of in our company where we are moving into a city that didn't have an EDA established at all. There might have been one more, but I think it was more of just it was dormant and they never ever met. You know, you guys are actually going to establish the enabling resolution. You're going to have your first set of meetings. You have a lot of opportunity too. I think that's another layer to this that I don't know that, you know, I just want you guys to all appreciate, because your location with Rochester, your location on Highway 52, the new sewer system that you guys are going to have, there's going to be demand for something. You guys have a better idea of what those somethings are going to be, but there's probably some things that you're not even thinking of yet too, that once you have that, and once you actually put your hat out and say, hey, we want business here, and here's what we're willing to do for you in a very organized way, you're going to get even more. And it is something that I think you'll notice as time goes on. You'll get your footing, and maybe 5-10 years down the road, as your program matures, it'll really take a life of its own, and people, whether from the public or from the outside, you'll just have this routine as to how we do development, and it'll just be another arm of the city to make things more efficient and better. And that's really what the work plan does. I mean, you know, honestly, it can be as simple as three priority listings. First priority, second priority, and just the ongoing things. The ongoing things I think are the easy ones to forget about. So I always like to start there when I'm doing a work plan, because somebody has to type the minutes, somebody has to do the agenda, somebody has to stay up on loan payments, somebody has to do the reporting. You know, depending on how many projects you guys get into, the reporting really isn't that bad, but sometimes it can take some time. So just making sure that that's built in and that everybody knows what that expectation is. On the backside of it is also communicating with the board, making sure that you know what is going on with the communities, that if you have subcommittees established, perhaps a loan committee or a special project committee that's really doing a deep dive on a particular subject, making sure that everybody is really talking to each other, that the reports are getting done across the organization, you know, whether that's to council. There's just a lot of opportunities for communication and you know, creating those relationships that the EDA is able to do. But ultimately what you're trying to do is you're trying to grow the community. You're trying to look at, you know, how do we create and retain jobs, grow the tax base. I don't know if you guys do any capital improvement planning. I know some of the financial consultants out there will do a really deep dive into here's what your tax rate will be in 10 years if you do all these things. Economic development is a way to change those numbers. You know, if you really want to get in there and say, hey, we need to grow our tax base in this particular way, or we need to get our sewer rates over here, so we need a lot more users, or whatever it might be. That's a way for the EDA to really focus in on those priorities, you know, or services. You know, if we really want to be a community where we want a lot of residents, okay, well, how do we attract residents? What do we have for them to do? What type of services do we provide? Amenities, social fabric, things like that. So it really can be your again, your sales team and kind of your underwriters for the whole tax base that allows you to change that common denominator, that everything else being equal, you just kind of plug along based on whatever those projections might be historically. That's really kind of my pitch in a nutshell as to what an EDA does, how it does it, what we're looking at for Orinoco moving forward. But what I did also want to talk about, if there are priorities that we can start thinking about and start kind of putting into a list, if just there's, I don't know what it would even be. And that's really, we just wanted to start that conversation. We can do a deeper dive next time. I did put some homework on here for you guys, just to think about. The board makeup, which is something we talked about quite a bit tonight. Potential members, start thinking about names. I think that's going to be something that certainly I wouldn't be out of line to have council members suggest names to the mayor. If the mayor has people in mind already, that's fine too. It's also something that some mayors will take applications and put a notice in the paper or something. So there's a lot of ways to do that. But starting to think about that, because it would be great if at meeting 3 or 4, we actually had some of those potential candidates or actual people that are going to be appointed in that process. We might run through, even just with those people, this same training again. So that'd be something that they would get exposed to as well. But I really felt it was important that you guys kind of see this too, just so you have those guardrails as to what are we really talking about here. And then the possible role of an EDA in Orinoco. Do you want it to be advisory only? Do you want it to eventually get to a more active department? Do you want to see it kind of with a more robust budget? I know of one community that they probably have a levy of $700,000 and they spend 140 of it on EDA because they just really want to see stuff happen. Some they just pay a little bit for our contract, and then we're out there trying to find grants and just do community work and get businesses moving in the right direction, provide technical assistance. That's fine too. So there's really a whole breadth in between. So that's up to you guys. And day one, you probably won't have a lot of stuff coming in right out of the gate. The analogy I always like to use is don't expect the moving truck to come day one. But hopefully over time that moving truck will make stops frequently. And so it really is something that I think you have to build that environment that people want to be in. And so setting this up in the right way, building a program that is robust that people want to be a part of will create more energy and more activity as time goes on. And then just, the projects and priorities of those projects. What is it that you want to see as council? What is it the residents want to see? Maybe there's something in your comprehensive plan that it has just been burning that you want to get done and you need some extra energy and focus or staff time. It could really be anything. So it doesn't have to just be, we're going to get a new business out by the CH Robinson building out there. Let's do this or let's do that. It can be just beautification. It can be rehab of buildings. It can be rehab of residences. It can be, we just want to get out and meet every business owner and see what's on their mind. One of the best parts of my job is just walking up and down Main Street and stopping into businesses and saying, hey, I'm working with the city EDA, and they all know me at this point in most of my towns, but what's up? What's going on? What can we do to help? What's going on? And then they come to you and you got problems or issues, and you never know what they're going to be thinking of. So that's really a fun part, because there's always something that can be done better. And that's really what the EDA is there to do, is just help the city be that better position. Yeah. So yeah, no ideas are too big or too small. Just dream. If you want to throw a few out even now, or have other questions, I'm happy to do that. But I'm thinking, we'll schedule another meeting like this, workshop, take about an hour and a half or so to maybe go through some of those things. But our next meeting, would be listed on your packet too. What we'd be looking at, solidifying your vision, discussing, some possible enabling resolution language. So we'll put some documents together for you that you can kind of take a look at in the meantime too. If there's anything we need to discuss about the makeup of the EDA at that point, certainly can too. And then just continue that brainstorm of possible projects. Ultimately having that prioritized list that we can all hit the ground running with. So
Well, off the top of my head, Chris, the thing that I've noticed just from being on council the last year is that we don't really have that system that you were talking about of how to deal with new businesses coming in and how to deal with potential developments. And I know we've lost business opportunities because of how long it can take and how cumbersome the processes are. So I would think that would be the number one goal, would be to get a solid system in place. And I don't know if that's just included in everything that we talked about, or if that's usually where you start. But for me, I think that would be helpful for everybody, including staff, to know exactly the processes that and in the order and all of that. I think that we all need that.
And I think part of it is because we don't have a plan.
Mm-hmm.
And so if a person comes and says, I want to, a lot of times I want to change the land use for this business on this property. And then we kind of spin our wheels like, well, that's not what the land use was for. Planning and zoning didn't zone it that way. They just redid the zoning, and we just don't really know. And it doesn't seem like that's a great idea. And I think that we do have, really the process is they go to planning and zoning, they get recommendation from planning and zoning on yes or no that they want to take this to council. But I feel like there's not a lot here. It's not like we have, Business Park A where we expect the coffee shop to go in next to the daycare center, next to the small grocery store, whatever it is. Like we just don't have, I feel like that's what we're missing, kind of the structure of where these things should go. Even though we have planning and zoning that created the land use map, I think that's where I struggle.
Well, and that's actually kind of the same side of the same coin, because that process is very important. You want to be able to tell the business owner that it's going to take, maybe 60 to 90 days to get through this process. And here's what I need first. Here's what we're going to do second. And then we should get this all approved by middle of June or whatever it is. Sometimes it's longer, sometimes it's shorter, and that type of flexibility is still needed. But having that process in place, where do they go first? A lot of times it can actually be to that EDA person, and that EDA person's job is to essentially hold their hand through that process, so that they might have to go to planning and zoning, and we wouldn't staff necessarily as an EDA person that board. But okay, here's what planning and zoning is going to ask. Here's the things that they're going to be concerned about. It's not in the land use plan. This is going to be an uphill battle. Is there another place we can look at, because it's not going to happen here, or there's utility issues there. The part of the EDA's role is to understand where those things are and how they interact with the city, so that you don't have to just wait for this board to say, okay, you can kind of run interference and put it in the best position to move it forward. But then on the same note, like you were saying, if there isn't any opportunities to if the land use is just taken up, okay, let's focus on businesses that can fit. Let's go make a list of those types and go get them.
I think that's where we haven't, I think there are places that I could imagine this town developing, and businesses that I could imagine going in different locations. But I wouldn't be a person that would go, hey, Joe, you want to come open a business in Orinoco? I think this would be a great place for you. Like, that's just not, that hasn't been our role as council. Right. And then, so we're having people knock on our door, but it's not necessarily the right place for the business. And then that structure makes it difficult. Like in my head, when we have Gold Rush and I see this town flood with people, and we have this beautiful river and we have amazing parks, but then the weekend's over and they leave, like I see that as our opportunity. Like we have this thing that people want to come for, but it's only one weekend a month or a year. And so that's where I look at
because I being on planning and zoning, sometimes I kind of struggle, just because of the way things are set up. you know, someone could come and say, okay, I want to put a business here. And if it fits into the land use plan, the future land use plan, they could put whatever business it is. I'm not going to call a business out, but they could put whatever business they want in that spot on Main Street just because it fits, because we really don't have the ability to say, nah, we don't want that there. You know, put that, you know, up towards the gas and go, or, you know, something like that, instead of saying, okay, our vision is this is what we want our downtown Main Street from this point to that point to consist of, or to look like, you know, to bring people off the highway, you know, and to bring that tax base, you know.
Setting that vision is extremely important and a
Yeah.
great job for the EDA. It doesn't mean that it's going to work out that way in every case, like you said. You know, if the zoning fits for that business, and you don't have to give them any money to incent them to do anything or to offset. You know, if it's something that goes against your development goals or your vision, you don't have to give them any public money, even if it is properly zoned and all of that. You know, dealing with some towns, they don't like retail variety stores, for example. But if it's zoned commercial and it meets the setbacks, a permit comes in, they have to issue it, whether they want it or not. Right. So if that happens, okay, well, they come in and they say, well, you know, we really need to have a water line here. We got to upgrade this or upgrade that. We'd really like this or that to make it work. You would be completely within your rights as an EDA or a city then to say, hey, you meet the zoning, but we're not going to incent or assist or provide that financial assistance to you because you don't meet X, Y, and Z goals. And having that vision, whether that's, you know, the type of businesses or the feel or, you know, kind of those softer things, that's definitely something that EDAs really try to do and set that goalpost out there. You know, whether that's certain businesses that you want to attract, a certain neighborhood that gets redeveloped. You can go as far as even creating an entire plan to say, hey, we want this entire block to get torn down at some point and be a hotel and an apartment building or something, whatever it would be. But you would be able to do that, and then you'd go out and try to make that happen. But knowing what your zoning allows for now, what's allowed where, that's part of the process. If there's maybe you take a stock of that, and that's a suggestion that the EDA might make to planning and zoning to say, hey, we need a little more commercial, or we need a little more industrial because we're a little tight on that. Or maybe we need a city-owned industrial park because we don't. Maybe there's an opportunity for the EDA to work with a landowner in a way that a private developer just isn't going to be able to. You know, a lot of community-minded people might be willing to sell to the EDA to grow the city and have kind of their name attached to it, where they might not be open to doing that to a guy that's just trying to make a buck. So those types of things, you know, you can look at, try to create those opportunities, but having that vision, realizing there's going to be some limitations, and you know, you might go through the whole process. You might have a really good project and it just can't get through zoning. But again, offering those alternatives, trying to guide it to a place that could be allowed. That's always an important thing too. So it's really that relationship building. It's that EDA director, that EDA staff person's really responsibility to know those things, or at least, you know, get to the point, you know, after a year or so where they can kind of talk intelligently about what the city's goals are, what the land use is going to be, where things can go, or even if they don't know specifically offhand, just knowing that counselors really like to see these types of things and they're willing to make exceptions in these cases. But if we're going to do this over here, tire burning plant, yeah, they're not putting that downtown. So, you know, those types of things, or maybe you really want a tire burning plant. I don't know, but you know, it's one of those things where you kind of, but yeah, you kind of learn that personality.
Yeah, like businesses, you know, say I have a business, I may not, you know, we may not want to put specific businesses beside each other, you know, they don't complement one another, whatever it is. You said the right thing, I guess.
Zoning will take care of a lot of that. And then, you know, assuming that zoning can't get that specific, that's where the finance tools come into place, because you don't have to offer them TIF if it doesn't fit your goals. You don't have to offer, you're giving them public assistance because you want that for the public. If the public doesn't want it, which you guys represent the public, you just don't give it to them. So
what permits come, like when permits start to come in, and this is just not something we've dealt with, right?
Yeah.
Like, there, you can't turn everything down. You can't, yeah.
Permit wise, no,
Yeah.
you'll probably have to sign off on it.
Right.
But in terms of giving them that extra,
Right,
you don't have to.
right. Okay.
And a lot of times that actually is what makes the deal go away. Because
Sure.
a lot of times they're looking at, well, we want this exception and some money. And
Yes.
that, you know, that's where the zoning, just making sure that you have that zoning in place. That's gonna be a separate conversation, but you all have to understand what the goals are, because we're all on the same team. You know, the EDA, the planning and zoning, we're all working towards the same goal. I always joke with the planners that their goal is to put up fences, and my goal as an EDA guy is to get around those fences and find exceptions to the rules. But you guys get to decide that, and I'm sure you've done that in the past too. So it's just a matter of, well, it's why you paid your $2-3 to be on the council and get elected and make those hard decisions. So, yeah, so there's a lot of good stuff there. Yeah, so if you do have project ideas or specific things, it sounds like you had a couple of ideas already going. We can certainly talk about those more next month, but if you want to shoot me an email too, I'm happy to leave cards here, or if you have questions afterwards, I'm happy to stick around after that too and chat. So we'll stick around for the rest of the meeting. So yeah, thank you guys.
So while you're
next month.
While you're here,
Yeah.
just touch base on the next meeting date.
Sure.
And I'll be on vacation from April 21st to May 3rd. So that kind of complicates end of April meeting date unless we, from April 21st and I return on May the 3rd. So
and there's no set schedule. I mean, if it takes 6 or 8 weeks to get to the next one, I mean, it goes at your speed. So whatever works for you guys.
I don't
First
want
week
to slow
in
down
May.
the process, but
I do May 9th, something like that.
Full rush.
it's gold rush. So the
Oh,
only
I'm May,
possible dates would be
sorry.
Wednesday, May 4th, May 5th, May
11th?
19th, or the week of the
Or
23rd.
do the 11th. I think 11th would work.
It's a Wednesday night, which we try and avoid. But
I can't.
if they make it early enough, I guess you've got to have
Yeah.
you have a conflict.
Yeah.
It's the only night of the week I don't have conflicts. The Wednesdays are the only night of the week I don't have conflicts.
What about Monday, the 16th?
16th, you said?
Yep. We have council the 17th.
I'm free.
I'm okay with that. Okay, 16th, Monday.
As far as I know, I am. I'm just gonna say that at the house. I'm just saying.
Does that work?
Brittany should be good on that. Put my phone right now.
We do our homework and
Yeah, take a look at the packet that I handed out. It has a couple of items there for homework, especially if you guys can kind of decide internally what those things might be. That'll help tremendously to help speed it up. You know, if you just even come up with a name, a list of people that you want to, do, we can talk about it too if you want, if you're wondering about questions and that kind of thing at this point too. But just trying to keep it moving along for you guys too, so you don't have to sit and talk about every single item. But I'm here to make it as easy as you want. But yeah, then leading to the agenda there on that second page would be what we'll be talking about. We're just really trying to dig into that. Enabling resolutions, we'll have some copies of that that'll be in your packet. And take a guess. It sounded like you like that option where it was, let's turn all the powers on and restrict them to council authority. I see a lot of nodding heads. So we'll come up with something on that end. Again, most of it's boilerplate. I'd recommend your attorney review it, make sure we're not off base or anything like that. But it's a pretty boilerplate document. Yeah, otherwise, yeah.
Just to touch base on our potential members. Does everybody want to blind copy me your suggestions, or how do you want to handle that?
You want to maybe make some kind of an announcement, just see if there's volunteers from the community that would be interested.
I think that's always a great idea. I don't love the idea of the application. I think that's messy. I mean, we've experienced that. So
At
I
this
think
point, I'm
like,
not sure what we put on it.
Right.
well, right, but I mean, I already started making a list. I know a lot of people, so I started making a list, and I think we probably all know people we would have in mind that we could give you their contact information and see if they're interested. And then also put it out there on the city website and city Facebook, and just like we do, like not an application thing, but just like FYI, we're in the process of forming. If you've ever been interested in becoming involved in economic development in Rochester, nope, or no go, then
Come to this meeting.
yeah, come to the meeting or just email you. We can figure it out.
Maybe with that, we have, you know, some balancing criteria that maybe, okay, or, you know, the board is going to have X members, and maybe you want, you know, X number of business owners, X number of residents.
Well, I think like that's something you can decide later, but just having, you know, getting that like that list.
Yeah, I wouldn't put that if there's criteria.
That list first,
Yeah.
you know what I mean? Like we just have to start, because like you said, you might have the best people in mind, but they might not be able to, you know, and that balance, you might just not be able to achieve that based on people's availability and willingness to do it. So as many names as you can give to start.
Yeah, because especially when you look at a 6-year commitment that there is, that's gonna
it doesn't hurt
scare
to
a
just,
lot of people right off from the get-go.
it doesn't hurt to get a lot of names out there. So I like the idea of sending you a list with contacts and just to get a name started, just to get it started. And then
So
putting.
it's
Or
sending
to have an
names and
open
not.
meeting, you know,
Well,
try that.
Yeah, because I was thinking we just put it out there and say, hey, if you're interested,
Yeah, see who responds.
turn your name into the city clerk, and, you know, we're taking a list of names, and then based on that list, because you would hope if they volunteer, they're gonna be eager to participate.
And come to the May 16th meeting then?
Right.
Yeah.
They certainly
Is that the right time?
Yeah, they certainly can. I think, you know, I might suggest maybe until meeting 3. I think, you know, you guys might want to look more at what you want to see the EDA work on before you start bringing people in. But as long as you're starting to think about who can be on that, then you'd be ready for that 3rd meeting to invite them in.
But I
if
think
they
to
wanna
get it
check-
out there right now, because
Yeah.
it gives them enough time to think about it instead of last minute.
Yeah, get that list growing.
If they want to attend the next meeting too, that's more than fine. But I think, you know, you're still in that position where the council needs to let
Yeah, we want to
let
look
everybody
like
know.
we know a little bit about what we're going to do. but-
Right.
They might not want to volunteer if you guys are just looking at building tire burning. You know, the other thing
A future
too.
meeting or something like that in June or something.
What's that?
Just a future meeting that will
Yeah,
have a potential of having a.
yeah, absolutely. And I think, you know, trying to find a night that's common for everybody, you know, if you are
Yes.
talking to people, trying to feel out what nights, if they're really excited, you know, when they have that commitment, because again, having that quorum is important. You gotta have it. And, you know, are you gonna meet monthly? Are you gonna meet, you know, is the expectation just an hour or so, you know, plus or minus? Maybe you do every other month. I think for the first little bit, you probably want to meet every month, but you're just finding that rhythm, just like you would with any other committee. You know, some cities, you know, small stipend to board members too. So I don't know what your practice is here, but that would be allowable too. So whatever you
It's a
guys
great
decide. So,
Yeah.
to retire or- But yeah, then kind of after the 3rd meeting, I think that 3rd meeting, it would be perfect to have potential or actual people that are going to be nominated be at that meeting. And then after that 3rd meeting, I think, you know, that's where they really participate in the process and, you know, kind of almost like a real form, like a less of a formal meeting, but more of just a round table. Let's all talk about, you know, how we're going to get this up and running. And then at some point between that 3rd and 4th, the council would actually establish that enabling resolution, pass that. And then that 4th meeting would be the first EDA meeting. And so that may be a first meeting of the EDA on its own. And actually, I would kind of recommend that and kind of let them go. Because at that point, we should have enough direction from the council as to what you guys want to see them do, what you see for the community and how to operate, that then they can take it on as their own. Because I think there is an importance that they as a board also have some buy-in and input into what those items on the work plan are. But then after that fourth meeting, it really should be a matter of, okay, here's what the city council is saying we want to do, how we want to do it. EDA members, now you guys get a crack at this. And then after that fourth meeting, and that's where maybe it takes a fifth meeting or sixth meeting with us to help the EDA kind of get up on that level, but having them kind of go through that first meeting and get their feet. So. And of course, then if there's two council members on there, you guys would be able to help out with that too. But the first couple meetings are always kind of awkward of a group. So.
I'm sure.
All right,
That's all I got.
that's a lot.
I know. I know it. But yeah, if you
Thank
do
you.
think of
Yes,
anything in the meantime, feel free to reach out. I can leave a card or just come grab me afterwards. So, thank you.
Okay, thanks,
you.
Chris.
Thanks.
Thank you.
All right, we'll go back to our agenda and number 7 was a Tyler Tech software for Michelle. And there's in your table there's the Tyler proposal. You may see it in the email, but this is a copy of it. So this is in one way it's kind of extending the job description, I think, for Michelle, as using software, questions.
A little bit. Right now, we've noticed we're kind of running into a little problems. She's supposed to be fielding a lot of the phone calls, and she's still passing them off because a lot of her phone calls is, what are my water bills? I didn't get my bill. What is it? You know, did I pay it? And she's got to keep now forwarding it to one of us because she can't get into the system. So it's just, she isn't going to be doing so much in it. It's just for her to be able to kind of do quick answers. And
I think all the staff that work in the same building should have access to the software. That just doesn't seem like a change.
Yeah, and this isn't for all of it. So she won't have access to like payroll and some of that stuff that she isn't going to have anything to do with.
Right.
It's just, you know, the normal ones that you need her to do.
Yeah.
Yeah, whatever fits into your.
Yeah, so there's
Right.
2 quotes in that packet. I don't remember what the first one is.
This is the one for the software.
Yeah, so the first one would give us more access. Right now, only one of us can be in the program at a time. So this would give us access for all of us to be in the programs at the same time, which actually would be beneficial because if she's upstairs and has to get into something, and she's got to go yell down or whatever, tell us to get out of the system so she can get in.
Right.
The other one is just mainly giving her access to get in, and we only can have one on it. So that's why there's 2 different prices.
So that's the difference between the 750 and the 12. Or I'm confused. I was confused when
the 1200 would be that one, and then the 140 would be just giving her access, but we'd still be sharing, so we could only have one week at a time. That's why there's a bigger difference.
Okay.
So it's 140 versus 1250.
Yes.
But then that would give.
What's the 750 then for licensing fee for the other one?
No, it's confusing. Geraldine did this, so I'm not exactly sure.
Project total at the top. So we're looking at a one-time $1,250, then an annual fee of $188.
I believe so, yes.
And then there's another fee of $140, which is a one-time fee. I don't see any
With no
recurring fees. I don't see any monthly fees.
What?
One fee of 140.
Personally,
So do we, this is where I was confused. That's why I was emailing her, but I never really got an answer back. licensing fees, I'm assuming that means then
That would be giving us all access.
all
I don't know
access.
what,
What is this implementation training? Like what? Do you need that implementation training?
Michelle.
That's what I don't that's what I was.
Training and
Yeah, is that
implementation
500
quota are
training?
web-based unless otherwise noted.
But is that necessary?
Right.
Because you've already been trained,
sort of,
not in any sort of.
not on all of it, no. I've had, well, and I don't know if that's an ongoing thing, because like we can call in and they call us and help us through a bunch of stuff all the time. We don't pay extra for it, so I don't know if that's.
But is there web stuff that you should be taking that you didn't know you had access to?
I'm wondering, are they just lumping the implementation and the training into one? I
140s for third-party hardware, software services.
see. So the trainings, web-based trainings, so let's take it your own phase. The implementation, I'm assuming it's not just install it and go, right?
It's, you know, I mean,
This is just one more example of like not having all the information you need to make a decision.
I hate to say this, because I want you guys to be able to do your work, but I sort of think we should just bring this back to the council meeting table and bring it back so that we can get you what you need and know what we're paying for.
Exactly.
It's a huge difference between
Right.
one and the other, and
No, it's again, like, just like I've said before, I'm not gonna approve something I don't understand or I'm not gonna even vote on it. You know what I mean? I don't have we don't have all the information we need, clearly.
Yeah.
So,
estimated travel expenses.
Yeah, because I'd like to understand what is implementation and training?
yep,
And do we need the implementation and training?
right, yeah,
I do want to see
yeah,
everybody gets
Personally,
on, yeah, I
everyone
think that's
have
good to have it.
at the
Yeah.
same time.
but do you need the extra $500 training and
Well,
Right.
and the thing that I don't understand is with the 140, like, don't we need implementation and training with that too? Like,
Yeah.
I don't that's I think
Yeah.
what I'm confused about.
That's
Make a motion to table the Tyler proposal until the
bring back with,
April 19th meeting.
bring back with more detail.
Yeah, I mean, we didn't have enough time to even go over it to figure it out, you know, by the time we got.
Right, we only got the one part in the email
Yeah.
today anyway.
Who seconded that?
I'll second it.
Jim?
your safe, saying, Jim.
Any more comments? I think it's a great idea. I just think we.
Yeah.
No, I want to have them use it. Everybody
Yeah.
should be able to do it.
At the same time.
It's just-
We'll get there. We just need to get there in the right way
Yeah.
at the right cost.
Any other comments? All those in favor, signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign, it's approved. Next item is a building permit. It was, laying on your desk. Read through a couple of the emails. This is kind of a unique situation, but it's important because we have engineering staff, Stantec, doing some inspections, but there's also some areas that our building inspectors will be looking at too. And I'm not sure the exact total, what we're supposed to be approving. Are we supposed to be approving the $30,995? This is the adjusted permit.
So on here, the first sheet that we totaled up for 92,996.13 was based off of Stantec telling the building inspectors it was a 20 whatever $million project for the facility. So then we go in and we put in all of our fees, came up to that $92,000 figure. And Joe came back saying, well, the city's paying for this. I don't think that's how it should be. And then he was like, well, the building is, there's a bunch of expensive equipment in there, so we shouldn't really look at that cost. We need to just look at the building cost. So we were going back and forth. We're still kind of going back and forth on what we should pay, what we shouldn't pay. Are we writing ourselves a check? Are we not writing ourselves a check? Like, this is ready to go and I don't know what to do with it.
Is this something? Where's the money coming from?
Exactly.
Yeah,
So
ourselves.
that's why we brought this to you guys tonight. I know it was kind of last minute, but I was gone last week and I was kind of dealing with Joe. I was dealing with the building inspectors and I don't know what to do with this.
Well, and I asked to put it on because Jerlyn had said, we don't know what to do with this. And I said, it needs to go on the agenda because I don't want it to turn into another thing that we don't have a paper trail for of where this money came from and where it's moving from one place to another. The other thing that I was concerned about is that it looks like the building inspector was a little upset that we are trying to get them to kind of cut down the fees. And I don't want that to happen. I want to make sure that we are being fair and reasonable and not trying to get out of paying someone for the work that they're doing on this project. So I think in the message on that second page, he says, Joe requesting we will bill less than normal for this project and try to minimize our involvement for the project. Spoke over the phone and don't need to turn this into a big mess as we'll continue working for years to come. They forgot to budget permit fees all along. When they saw the numbers, started worrying because no one accounted for it and they wanted us to charge less to help with that. We asked them if they're charging less for their services and there was just silence on the phone because they're not. We'll be involved in most of this project with the exception of some of the unique specific process piping and lift stations. Can't adjust our fees because of a mistake on their end and it's unethical and unfair to everyone else we serve and could cause legal issues. So the value of $9 million for the buildings and concrete on the project is a fair based on other projects and we are going to run with that as stated above. I want to be above board. I want to make sure that we are doing what we should be doing.
So yeah, in Joe's original email, he was proposing 8 to 9 million too. In the bottom, last line of the paragraph, and he asked Roger what your experience was. Unless I'm misunderstanding exactly what figure he was referring to. So then Renee responded, here's the attached payment sheet based on what we currently do with any other project.
So that was my first original one. After we got the permit back, we totaled up all the fees. I sent that out to Stab and to Joe because I didn't know who was paying for this or how we were doing it and said, okay, this permit's ready. Who's paying for it? And then Joe came back with that. And then he talked to Roger and then Roger sent us that other email. So
but then Roger agreed that 9 million was okay.
well, that's what Joe is saying. And Roger is saying, yes, he did kind of agree to it, but I mean, both Jerlyn and I have talked to Roger and to Casey, and they were not very happy with this whole situation at all.
I see this, I mean, I'm not defending Joe, but I see this as a conversation that they had. And there was a conversation about Roger and Joe talking back and forth, and that's fine. But then the end result was Roger agreed with what was being proposed by Joe. and he's right. You know, we didn't allow for the fees and the bonding bill money. And we are providing something. So the question I have is, it just feels like we're paying ourselves. No, I mean, we're paying, you just, the plan review, the $8,000, that is what we're paying Roger and Casey to do the plan review.
They will get the building permit and the plan review. But if you look at the two different totals, there's a huge difference in those. So they went based off of what the original price was for the, the higher fees. And then after they talked, they came back with the adjusted ones. So they will get those too. The state surcharge, that has to go to the state. The zoning permit, I don't know. Do we pay ourselves for that? I don't know. This is kind of where I'm like, there's no guidance and I don't know what to do. So
Yeah, that's where like, I think it'd be good to have Joe here and
Mike too, just so we're not
And
doing
Mike,
anything
yeah.
wrong. You know, and I would question why we would pay ourselves, because it's our city project. But you know, and maybe this was just because it was conversation. To me, I see this was on the 18th. I would have liked to have been able to have some time to really go through it.
Yeah,
Until.
it said just the
Yeah.
last minute,
Right.
whatever's.
Why is Sandra Jessen on the CC?
I think that's what he has Geraldine's email, old email under.
so just from a silly question, but the builder is Staub. So are we asking Staub for the $30,000?
That's what we're asking.
I mean, that's where we say we're paying ourselves, but it's.
You know, sometimes I have homeowners come in and pay for the building permit. Sometimes I have the contractors come in and pay for it. So I guess in this situation, if you're looking at it that way, we are kind of the owners of the building versus the contractor. So who comes in and pays for this?
Yeah.
Do we write a check to ourselves? Do we write a check just to cover?
But what's,
I don't know.
you know, I guess I would like to ask Joe the question of, does the contractor normally figure that into their bid process?
And it should have been in there to start out with.
That's
and
what it
whoever-
sounds like, that got missed.
Well,
Yeah,
I
and
think,
then why, you know, who was responsible for that?
yeah, I'd rather have Joe respond to that than my.
Is there a
Tertiary comment,
time,
Yeah.
is there a
Yeah.
timeline that we miss if we
I don't think so. I
if
mean,
we
I think
wait
if you guys
until
are
the
okay,
city
we
council
can.
meeting?
I mean, I guess I don't know. Normally, we don't let them pick up the contract or the permit until it's paid for. But if we're actually the ones that are paying for it and we just needed to figure out how, then I don't see why the contractor can't come get it. And then we can just figure out.
Because he just needs to have the permit to show the
Inspectors, correct.
Did the contractor say I need the permit? Like how
Not
did this
yet.
process start?
So they bring the permit into us, we give it to the building inspectors. Once the building inspectors go through and do all their plans, which I know they've gotten, I think like 3 different ones. And they keep changing stuff. I know some of the change orders are on there and I don't know if they have all those yet. So I don't know if the plan reviews are actually all done. But once they're done with their things, they say, yes, it's okay. They give it to me. I usually will call whoever the contact person is. Your permit's ready. This is the price. They come in, pay it. I give it to them. And then when they're ready, they call the inspectors.
Because part of me thinks that in this case, we should still be following that. Like to keep things clean, the contractor should pay for the permit and then we pay the contractor in the work orders, right? I mean, this is part of that project
Yeah, and
fund.
that's the challenge is that, at least this here, I guess my understanding is that had we planned for this $93,000 building permit, that would have been included in the contract for Staub to bid on. That would have been a line item that made up the total for $20 million.
Mhm.
And that's what was overlooked.
Was it overlooked by the contractor or by us?
Oh, no, it was by us. I mean, Joe mentions that too here someplace.
So when we say by us, is that Sandtech
Well,
or?
it's Stan Tech drawing up the bonding bill, the spec.
So when Joe says, as discussed, the city will pay 100% of the building inspection permit fees. What does that mean? On the first page, the first line of the first page, Roger and Renee, as discussed.
Oh, okay. Make a motion, we table this to April 19th meeting.
Second.
I'm glad we have this in our hands though now. So
Yeah,
that
then
we
we can at least try to figure it out. Yeah, because it's like last minute, it's like,
Yeah.
really?
No, this is too complicated.
Oh, yeah. Especially with arrows and everything else. That's going.
Joe's
It's
on
like,
vacation this week,
That's
so-
what throws you.
Well, I've redone the fees on them like 4 times, so
Yeah.
I don't
You're doing
blame
the
you
right
for
thing.
looking at it like it's.
Yeah.
Just give it time.
No,
And I would just ask as a courtesy to the council, if we have something this far in advance, if we could get it either in our packet, or was this a result, Lori, of you saying, hey, this should come back?
Well,
Or
because,
come to the council.
yeah, I did not want any checks to be written out without this coming to us. And I said, let's talk. We all need to know this is happening. So that's why I asked to bring it today.
No, it's good to have it ahead of time, but it's just too much to decide. I think especially without Joe and especially without.
Yeah, there's some unknowns.
And like I said, I got it on the 18th. I was here Monday and then I was out for training. So this was kind of my first day back or whatever. And I started asking them, what do I do with this? After going back.
Well, thanks for asking,
Now we
which is
know.
the right idea
Yes.
behind it.
Yeah.
So,
All in favor, signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Motion to adjourn. Second.
All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Adjourn date 26.
Business card.
Oh, yes.
Please.
Absolutely. Forgot about that. Thanks for reminding me.
Please, yes.
Yeah. Anybody else want one?
Yeah.
Thank you.